The night my daughter told me not to expect to stay under her roof was the night I realized 15 years of sacrifice meant nothing. I had given her my savings, my pension, my late husband's life insurance, nearly $500,000 to keep her family afloat. I paid their mortgage, covered hospital bills, even funded their vacations. But when I refused to sign a $200,000 loan for her husband's risky startup, she looked me in the eye and said, "Then don't expect to stay here much longer." That single sentence shattered something in me. By dawn, I was gone. No fight, no goodbye. They thought I'd crawl back. Instead, I built a life without them. But they didn't disappear quietly. And what followed would test the very limits of what a mother can forgive. The sharp bite of a Seattle winter night lingered outside, but inside Lauren's dining room, warmth wrapped around the space like a heavy quilt. The amber glow from the chandelier fell across the polished mahogany table, where I was arranging plates with the same precision I had for every family dinner over the past 5 years. At 68, my joints complained with each step, but habit and love had kept me in motion far longer than pride ever could. I paused to straighten the silverware, my eyes catching the row of framed photographs lining the sideboard. Lauren in her white wedding dress, Brent's proud arm looped around her waist. Ava's high school graduation, Noah in his cap and gown. Each image was a chapter of a life I'd been invited to pay for, sometimes in joy, often in urgency. There was also a stack of envelopes near my purse. Ava's college tuition, Noah's semester fees, insurance payments that were due next week, all part of the routine. From the kitchen, Brent's voice carried a note of excitement I'd heard before, the kind that always came with a pitch. "Maggie, you've got to see this," he called, tapping furiously on a tablet screen. Lauren followed him in, balancing a steaming bowl of mashed potatoes. "Show her, honey." I wiped my hands on my apron and approached, more out of politeness than curiosity. Brent turned the screen toward me with a flourish. Charts, graphs, and numbers glowed in soft blue. "It's my new business," he said, his voice brimming with confidence. "A software platform. We've finished beta testing, got a few early clients lined up. All I need is backing for servers and office space. $200,000 to launch. This is it, Maggie, the future." Lauren set the bowl down, her gaze darting between us. "This could change everything for us, for the kids." I stayed quiet for a beat, letting the hum of the heating vent fill the space. "And you want me to sign a loan?" "Not a loan," Brent said quickly, leaning forward as though proximity would sell the idea. "An investment. You'll get it back and then some. We're talking generational wealth here." I returned to the table, adjusting the last fork. "Brent, I've been helping you two for 15 years. Mortgage, car payments, medical bills, tuition, home repairs. Every time I said yes." "That's because you believe in us," Lauren interjected, her tone clipped but hopeful. I placed the fork down, its clatter on the hardwood louder than I intended. "No. It's because I believed in family. There's a difference." For a moment, silence hung between us like frost on a window pane. Brent's smile faltered. Lauren's face tightened, her eyes narrowing into something I hadn't seen since she was a teenager testing boundaries. "Maggie," Brent began, "this is the one time it really matters." I cut him off. "I'm not signing. Not this time." The air in the room shifted, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. Lauren's jaw worked before the words came, sharp and cold. "Then don't expect to stay here much longer." The sound landed like a physical blow. For a moment, I wasn't in the dining room anymore. I was at the graveside of my husband, clutching a folded flag, hearing Lauren promise, "You'll always have a home with us." I drew in a slow breath, willing my voice to remain steady. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," she replied, setting her napkin down with deliberate precision. The mashed potatoes shifted in their bowl, spilling slightly over the rim. "If you're not willing to be part of this family's success, maybe you shouldn't be part of this family at all." Brent reached for her arm. "Lauren, maybe—" She shook him off, rising from her chair. "Dinner's getting cold." The rest of the meal passed in strained silence. Brent made half-hearted attempts at conversation. I answered in monosyllables. Lauren avoided my gaze entirely. Later, alone in the small upstairs room they called my suite, I sat on the edge of the bed. My nightstand held the same photos from downstairs, only here they seemed to mock me. Lauren in her prom dress, Lauren holding Ava as a newborn, Lauren laughing at a family picnic. All those years, all that love, and now a single sentence had rewritten my place in her life. I opened the cedar box at my feet, pulling out the worn leather binder that had been my ledger for the past decade and a half. Page after page detailed the checks I'd written, the transfers I'd made, the emergencies I'd covered. I ran my fingers over the total at the bottom of the last page, $487,000. My pension, my savings, my husband's insurance, funneled into a life that now had no room for me. Somewhere downstairs I heard the faint murmur of voices, Lauren and Brent talking low but sharp. My name came up twice, each time followed by a pause that said more than words could. I closed the binder, my decision solidifying like ice. Tomorrow I would take back control. Every transfer, every link between my accounts and theirs, gone. And with it, the part of me that still believed they'd ever see me as more than a safety net. The clang of silver meeting porcelain was sharper now, each sound echoing in the tense air. A streak of tomato sauce had fallen onto the embroidered table runner, a gift from my late husband's sister, and no one moved to clean it. From the kitchen, the faint, warm scent of dried cinnamon drifted in from the spice rack. Brent had pulled the jar out earlier, claiming he might add a touch of flavor to the gravy, but he'd left it uncapped. That smell brought me back years in an instant. I saw Richard, my husband, standing in our old kitchen, sleeves rolled up, whisking cinnamon into his famous apple cider. He'd wink at me as the steam rose, saying, "Sweetness makes the bitterness easier to swallow." Now, the sweetness was gone, and the bitterness was all that remained. Lauren's words still reverberated in my ears, as heavy as the night he was lowered into the ground. But my mind wandered, uninvited, to all the ways I had caught her when she fell, signing the check for her hospital bill when Ava was born early, buying her a reliable sedan when Brent's car died, wiring funds for a leaking roof in the middle of a winter storm. And then there were the silences. The silence in the recovery ward 2 years ago when I woke from knee surgery to find only the sterile beep of machines for company. Ava had come, twice, with flowers from the grocery store and stories from her classes. Lauren had sent a text. Brent had not appeared at all. A chair scraped back across the hardwood. Lauren stood, face set in that familiar combination of anger and pride. Without another word, she carried her plate into the kitchen. The sound of running water soon followed, but it was too forceful, more about avoiding conversation than cleaning dishes. Brent lingered a moment, shifting his weight as if deciding whether to say something. He didn't. I gathered my purse from the hallway bench, slipping my scarf over my shoulders. That was when I felt a light tug at the edge of my cardigan. It was Ava. She looked up at me from beneath her dark fringe, eyes clear and steady despite the tension in the house. Without speaking, she pressed a small folded piece of paper into my hand, her palm warm against mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Then she turned and headed upstairs before I could respond. I didn't open it right away. In my room, I sat on the bed and unfolded the note. On the paper, in careful strokes, she'd drawn a sprig of cinnamon, almost identical to the one in the kitchen jar. And beneath it, in neat handwriting, "I see you." The words hit harder than I expected. A lifetime of being the one who noticed, who filled the gaps. And here was someone noticing me. My throat tightened. I slipped the note into the back pocket of my leather-bound ledger, where I kept the things too important to lose. The warmth from that moment carried me for exactly 2 minutes, until I heard Brent's voice from below. It wasn't hushed. It wasn't apologetic. It was buoyant, as if dinner had been a pleasant affair. "We'll figure it out," he was saying. "Maggie won't do it, but I've got other options. Maybe Don from the co-working space. Yeah, he might front the cash." There was a pause, then his laugh. That same easy, confident laugh he used at barbecues when telling stories about deals that never happened. The sound made the walls feel thinner, as though I could see through them to the exact expression on his face. Relaxed, expectant, already calculating how to get someone else to take the risk. In that instant, the fragile lift Ava had given me fell away. I wasn't an indispensable part of this household. I was an account number, a signature line. Without those, I had already been replaced in his plans. I closed my door, turning the lock with a quiet click. Tomorrow I would begin the process of untangling myself from their ledger. But tonight, I would sit here with the cinnamon scent fading in the air, the note from Ava safe in my ledger, and the understanding, sharper than ever, that the love I had poured into this family had been measured, weighed, and found expendable. Dawn seeped into the edges of the curtains before the rest of the house stirred. I had barely slept. The decision I'd made last night pulsed steady in my mind, stronger than the ache in my knees or the heaviness in my chest. By 7 a.m., I was dressed in my navy wool coat, scarf knotted firmly at my throat, and leather binder tucked under my arm. The bank opened at 8, but I was there 10 minutes early, standing outside beneath the frosty breath of January air. The glass doors reflected an image I barely recognized. Hair silvered more than I'd noticed, eyes sharper, posture straighter than it had been in years. Inside, the warm hum of the bank replaced the brittle cold. A young teller greeted me, then ushered me toward the office of a manager in a charcoal suit. His brass nameplate read Daniel Green. "Mrs. Hale, how can we help you today?" he asked, offering a professional smile. "I need to cancel all automatic transfers to this account," I said, sliding a folded paper with the routing numbers toward him. He tapped at his keyboard, glancing at the list. "These have been running for 15 years?" "Yes," I answered. "And they end today." He hesitated, as if there were a script he ought to follow but couldn't find the words for. "May I ask why?" I met his gaze squarely. "Because I'm done being taken for granted." The click of his keyboard filled the silence. One by one, the transfers disappeared from his screen. He printed a confirmation, slid it across the desk, and had me sign. By the time I stepped back into the winter sunlight, I felt lighter. The invisible threads tying my accounts to theirs had been cut. From the sidewalk, I dialed another number, one I'd saved but never used. It belonged to a lawyer named Harriet Cole, recommended by Marjorie from church. Harriet answered on the second ring, her voice brisk but warm. "Mrs. Hale? Marjorie told me you might call. How can I help?" "I need to set up an irrevocable trust," I said, "and revoke an existing power of attorney. Today, if possible." An hour later, I was seated in her office, the scent of fresh coffee and legal pads in the air. Harriet was in her early 50s, with reading glasses perched low on her nose and an air of practiced efficiency. "We'll put your granddaughter Ava as the primary beneficiary," she suggested, after I outlined my wishes. "She's over 18, yes?" "Yes, she's the only one who's earned that place." We worked through the details, the trust documents, the signatures, the notary seal that landed with a solid thunk. When she handed me the thick folder, I gripped it like a shield. "Mrs. Hale," Harriet said as I rose to leave, "this is more than asset protection. It's a boundary. Stick to it." "I intend to," I replied. By the time I returned to Lauren's house, the mid-afternoon sun had begun to sink. Neither she nor Brent was home. The stillness inside made the rooms feel cavernous. I set my binder on the desk and pulled out my phone again, scrolling to the contact for Kate Anderson, a real estate agent whose card I'd kept for months. "Kate, it's Maggie Hale. I'm looking for a one-bedroom apartment. Something quiet, safe, and available immediately." Her voice brightened. "I can have listings to you by tonight. When do you want to move?" "As soon as possible." The rest of the evening was a quiet choreography. I began sorting what would come with me. The cloth-bound journal Richard had used to jot down grocery lists and love notes, a few framed photographs from better years, my worn library card with the edges frayed from use. I didn't bother with the larger pieces. The armchair I favored, the heavy quilt on my bed, those could be replaced. What I wanted now were things that carried the weight of memory without anchoring me to this place. The house was still silent when darkness settled. I moved slowly, packing into 2 sturdy suitcases and a cardboard box I'd found in the garage. By the time I zipped the last bag, the clock read 10:47 p.m. I sat for a while in the armchair in my room, listening to the creak of the house settling. Somewhere out there, Brent was probably still talking about his big opportunity. Somewhere, Lauren was telling herself she was right. I let those thoughts drift away. The real work would come in the morning. At 5:30 a.m., I rose without an alarm. The sky was a pale wash of gray, the kind of dawn that arrives quietly without fanfare. I dressed, slipped on my coat, and carried my bags downstairs. On the kitchen counter, I placed my house key on top of a plain white envelope. Inside was a note with 2 short paragraphs. Lauren and Brent, I've moved out. The keys are on the counter. You'll find I've canceled all financial support. You wanted independence from my expectations. I'm giving you independence from my assistance. Do not contact me until you're ready to apologize. Maggie. I stood there for a moment looking at the neat handwriting, then turned toward the door. The air outside was cold enough to sting, but it felt cleaner than it had in years. With each step toward the street, the house receded behind me, and the weight of it, the obligations, the constant demands, the unspoken resentments, began to dissolve. The bank manager had just stepped out to print the cancellation confirmations when the young teller from earlier poked her head into the office. She was barely older than Ava, with a neat bun and a curious tilt to her head. "Mrs. Hale," she asked gently, "if you don't mind me asking, without these transfers, will someone be there to support you if you ever need help?" I set my pen down, meeting her eyes. "I'll take care of myself," I said. The words felt like a declaration, one I hadn't dared speak out loud in years. When Daniel returned, I signed the last page. The pen glided easily, each stroke snipping away a thread that had bound me to Lauren and Brent. A small rush of relief bubbled up in my chest, almost enough to make me smile. On my way out, I decided to withdraw a small sum in cash for the next few days. The ATM screen glowed cold and impersonal in the lobby. I keyed in my PIN, selected the option for a balance inquiry, and waited. The number blinked onto the screen, and my relief plummeted. The balance was thousands lower than it had been yesterday. My stomach knotted. I checked the transaction history. There it was. A large withdrawal had posted just an hour before I'd arrived. The account holder with power of attorney, Brent, had taken what he could before the door closed. The relief that had warmed me moments ago iced over into something else entirely. I took the cash I'd planned, folded it into my wallet, and turned away from the machine without looking at the screen again. The wind outside was sharp against my cheeks as I walked toward the bus stop. I kept my chin high, telling myself it didn't matter, that the trust papers in my bag were still my victory. But the sour taste lingered. Back at Lauren's, the house was empty, just as I'd left it. I moved methodically through the motions, packing the last of my belongings, checking drawers and shelves to be sure nothing important remained. In the small desk by my bed, the one where I kept my reading glasses and the occasional crossword, I found something unexpected. Tucked beneath a folded tea towel was a small brass key on a plain ring, taped to a folded note. I peeled the tape away and unfolded the paper. Ava's handwriting in neat block letters filled the center. "For when you need me." It was such a simple gesture, yet it hit me harder than Brent's theft. A key wasn't just metal, it was trust. It was safety. It was a promise that somewhere in this family I wasn't entirely alone. I slipped it into my wallet next to the cinnamon sprig note she'd given me the night before. By the time the sky began to lighten, my bags were lined up by the front door. The kitchen counter held my envelope for Lauren and Brent, the key neatly placed on top. I turned to take one last look at the room that had been mine for 5 years. The neutral walls, the lace curtains I'd hemmed myself, the bookshelf half filled with titles no one but me had touched. That was when movement caught my eye. Across the room, through the narrow side window, a shadow passed. I stepped closer, my pulse picking up. Brent. He was outside, just beyond the glass, his breath fogging the early morning air. His gaze swept over the room like a hawk scanning for prey. I froze, watching as his eyes lingered on my desk, my nightstand, even the base of the closet door. It took me a moment to realize what he was doing, checking to see if I'd left anything of value behind. When his gaze flicked up and met mine, he didn't flinch. He just offered the faintest of smiles, smug, knowing, before turning away and walking toward the driveway. I stayed by the window until the sound of his footsteps faded. The warmth from Ava's gesture was still in my pocket, but now it sat beside a reminder. Some people in this family saw me as nothing more than what I could leave behind. I tightened my grip on the handle of my suitcase. The sun was beginning to rise, pale light spilling across the frost-covered lawn. It was time to go. The first week in the new apartment felt like breathing clean air after years in a smoke-filled room. My unit was on the 4th floor of a modest brick building, just off a tree-lined street. From my kitchen window, I could see the tops of old maples swaying in the wind. The silence was different here. Not the heavy, resentful quiet of Lauren's house, but the kind that let my thoughts settle without interruption. Morning routines became small rituals. Coffee at 7:00, the newspaper spread across my little table, a short walk to the park where I fed the sparrows. I didn't have to time my meals around anyone else's schedule or brace myself for a request disguised as conversation. For the first time in years, I felt ownership over my hours. No one burst into my room. No urgent calls interrupted my afternoons. Harriet's trust documents and my bank statements sat neatly filed in the small cabinet I'd bought secondhand, a symbol that my life was finally under my own lock and key. It was on a Tuesday morning, 1 week into this new routine, that the disruption came. I was rinsing my coffee mug when my phone buzzed against the counter. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me swipe to answer. "Maggie." Brent's voice was far too cheerful. "Lauren and I are in the neighborhood. Thought we'd stop by to clear the air." My hand tightened around the mug. Clear the air. From Brent usually meant, make another pitch. "I don't think... It's not just us," he cut in. "A few others want to talk too. It'll be good for everyone." The line went dead before I could respond. A heaviness settled in my stomach. A few others. That could mean anything, but I had a sinking feeling I already knew. 20 minutes later, the chime of my doorbell shattered the stillness. I approached quietly and looked through the peephole. They stood in formation, as if staging some strange family tableau. Brent front and center, holding a bouquet of supermarket roses. Lauren beside him, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Behind them, Brent's parents. Thomas with his factory-worn hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, Linda clutching her purse like a shield. Noah lingered near the back, hands shoved in his hoodie, eyes darting anywhere but the door. And there, slightly apart from the group, was Ava, her expression unreadable. "Maggie, open up," Thomas called, his voice low but firm. "We need to talk about the damage you're doing to this family." I opened the door just enough to stand in the threshold. "I don't recall inviting you." Lauren stepped forward. "Mom, this is an intervention. You've cut yourself off from everyone. You've abandoned us." "I stopped funding you," I corrected. "That's not the same as abandoning." "You're being selfish." Linda's voice rose, sharp and rehearsed. "At your age, you should be helping the younger generation get established." I felt the corner of my mouth lift, not in amusement, but disbelief. I helped establish a pattern of dependency. I'm correcting that now. Brent thrust the bouquet toward me as if flowers could erase bank withdrawals. Let's talk inside. No one wants to do this in the hallway. No, I said. The word hung there, a small wall between us. From behind them, Noah muttered, "Grandma, you've changed. You never used to be like this." It was Ava's voice that cut through the noise. Calm, steady. "When did any of you visit her in the hospital after her surgery?" Noah blinked. Caught off guard, Linda shifted uncomfortably. "Or remember her birthday without being reminded?" Ava continued, eyes sweeping over them all. "Young lady, this is adult business," Linda snapped. "I understand enough," Ava said, her gaze sliding to me. For a moment, the entire hallway seemed to hold its breath. Lauren's eyes glistened, the practiced tears ready to fall. "Mom, we could lose everything. The house, the business, don't you care? When you learn to respect me, you can call," I said evenly. And with that, I stepped back and closed the door. The latch clicked, cutting off the tangle of voices that immediately rose on the other side. Protests, guilt, anger, all blending into the same noise I'd lived with for too long. I leaned against the door for a moment, breathing in the silence. It was mine again. And this time, I wasn't giving it up. The morning had started gently enough. I was watering the small row of potted herbs along my kitchen windowsill when a knock came. Not the pounding of demand, but a light, polite rap. When I opened the door, Mrs. Alden from across the hall stood there, bundled in a faded red cardigan, holding a terracotta pot. "Saw you don't have much green in your place yet," she said, smiling. Inside the pot was a spindly cinnamon plant, its leaves glossy and fragrant. "It's a runt from my garden," she said, "but it's stubborn. Thought you might like the company." I ran my fingers over the leaves, the scent instantly pulling me back to winter mornings with Richard, the way he'd slip cinnamon sticks into coffee just to make me smile. "That's lovely," I said, surprised by the lump in my throat. "Thank you truly." She patted my arm. "Plants and people both do better with a little care and a lot of boundaries." I set the plant on the windowsill, letting the scent wrap around me like a memory I wanted to keep. For a moment, the apartment felt warmer, more mine. Then the pounding started. It wasn't a polite knock this time. It was fists and palms hitting wood in a steady, urgent rhythm. My stomach tightened even before I reached the peephole. Through the fisheye glass, the hallway was crowded. Brent and Lauren in front, Brent's parents flanking them, Noah and Ava further back. Brent's bouquet drooped slightly in his grip. I opened the door just enough to stand there. Lauren launched in first. "Mom, we've all come because this has gone on long enough." Linda chimed in. "We're here to talk sense into you." I stayed silent, letting the noise wash over me. But then a voice I didn't expect cut through. Noah's. "Maybe you guys should back off," he said, glancing toward me. "She's been through enough." The words were so unexpected they pierced straight through my guard. For a moment, I saw the boy I'd bounced on my knee, the one who'd once drawn me a crooked heart in red crayon. Lauren turned on him. "Noah, not now." He shrugged. "I'm just saying, maybe Grandma has her reasons." A small, fragile hope stirred in me. Maybe one of them understood. Thomas stepped forward, his voice booming. "Maggie, you can't just cut family out. We're supposed to help each other." "I've helped for 15 years, I said, "and look where that's gotten us." Noah shifted his weight, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Actually, Grandma, since we're talking, I could use some help. Just a quick loan. A couple $1,000. I've got this debt, and if I don't pay it this week, I'm screwed." The fragile hope in my chest cracked clean through. I stared at him. "So that's why you're speaking up for me? To get money?" He had the grace to look sheepish, but only for a heartbeat. "It's urgent. I wouldn't ask if—" "I'm not giving you a dime," I said, my voice cutting clean through the hallway noise. The air seemed to shift. Surprise, embarrassment, anger, all mingling among the faces staring back at me. You'd really let me sink? Noah's tone was incredulous, as though the thought were impossible. I'd really let you learn, I answered. Brent stepped in then, his smirk barely contained. See? She doesn't care about anyone but herself. Ava's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Lauren's eyes brimmed with tears, the kind she could summon like clockwork. Mom, this isn't you. You've changed. I kept my gaze steady. When you learn to respect me, you can call. Until then, this conversation is over. I stepped back and shut the door. Their voices rose immediately, a muddle of protest and indignation. I leaned against the wood, the cinnamon plant scent drifting over from the windowsill. That warmth from earlier hadn't disappeared completely, but it was thinner now, tempered by the reminder that for some, every kindness was just a prelude to a request. On the other side of the door, the pounding finally stopped. Footsteps shuffled, voices moved away. I waited until silence reclaimed the hallway before walking back to the kitchen. The plant sat there, leaves catching the light. Stubborn, Mrs. Alden had called it. I decided I'd keep it right where it was. The flyer had been tacked to the community bulletin board in my apartment lobby for weeks before I noticed it. Second table, a place for seniors to share knowledge, protect independence, and build new friendships. It met every Thursday at the downtown library. I almost didn't go. Part of me still clung to the habit of keeping to myself. But the thought of spending another evening listening to the hum of my refrigerator pushed me out the door. The meeting room smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper. Around a long table sat a mix of men and women, most in their 60s and 70s, some with canes propped against their chairs, others with notepads open. That's where I met Ruth. She was small and wiry, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her silver hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense braid, and she greeted me like she'd been expecting me for years. "You're new," she said, sliding a stack of pamphlets toward me. "Sit. We're just getting started." The evening's topic was financial self-defense, how to safeguard assets, spot scams, and most importantly, how to prevent well-meaning family from draining you dry. As the speaker went over irrevocable trusts, my ears sharpened. "I already have one," I mentioned quietly to Ruth during the break. "Good," she said, nodding. "But review it regularly. Life changes, laws change, and loopholes have a way of appearing when you're not looking." We spent the rest of the session comparing notes, and by the end, she'd given me the number of an attorney she swore by, someone who could help me tighten my trust so that even the most creative relative couldn't touch a cent. The next day, I called. By the following week, I was sitting in an office lined with law books, listening as the attorney combed through my documents. "You've done well," he said, "but here's where we can make it ironclad." By the time I left, the amendments were signed, notarized, and scheduled for official filing. My savings, my pension, the modest investments Richard and I had built, they were all untouchable now. The sense of relief was quiet but deep, like a locked door clicking shut. Ruth insisted I come to the next second table meeting, and from there, she pulled me into another community project, the church's Saturday kitchen, known as the community table. It was noisy, warm, and smelled of yeast and cinnamon. Volunteers bustled about, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and sliding trays into ovens. Ruth handed me an apron. "You bake?" I hadn't in years, but when she suggested cinnamon cookies, I found myself measuring flour, sugar, and ground spice, as though muscle memory had been waiting for this moment. The scent rising from the oven was almost overwhelming. It carried me back to the mornings when Richard would read the paper at the table, tapping his mug for a refill, the air rich with the smell of baking. The people at community table worked with easy camaraderie. No one asked me for money, no one hinted at favors. They just laughed, swapped recipes, and shared stories over the clatter of dishes. That's where I was when Ruth slid into the chair beside me, lowering her voice. "Heard something you might want to know." I glanced at her. "Go on." "Your daughter and son-in-law. Word is they're in trouble." I set down my cooling rack. "What kind of trouble?" Brent's gone. Packed a bag, left about a week ago. Some say he's staying with his parents. Others say he's chasing another business opportunity in Portland. Either way, he's not at the house. A knot formed low in my stomach. Not of worry exactly, but of inevitability. And Lauren? She's been working herself raw. Double shifts, sometimes triples. Looks like she's lost weight. Folks say she's barely home. I stared at the cookies, their warm scent suddenly edged with bitterness. I could picture her, jaw tight, eyes tired, trying to patch holes in a ship that had been sinking long before I stepped away. "Does Ava still live there?" I asked. Ruth nodded. "Her and Noah. But from what I hear, Noah's been restless." That didn't surprise me. I picked up a cookie, turned it over in my hand, then set it down again. The sympathy was there, buried under layers of self-preservation, but sympathy wasn't enough to make me step back into the role they expected. By the end of the day, we'd fed nearly 200 people. My hands smelled of cinnamon and dish soap. The kitchen lights dimmed as we cleaned up, and I realized I felt more at home here among strangers than I had in years under my own daughter's roof. The following Tuesday, Ruth called me out of the blue. "Put on your walking shoes," she said. "We're going somewhere." I met her on the corner and we strolled the 6 blocks to the neighborhood library, a low brick building with tall windows that spilled warm light onto the sidewalk. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. Children's laughter drifted from the reading nook, while the soft shuffle of turning pages came from the adult section. At the front desk, Ruth handed something to the librarian and motioned me forward. "Go on." The woman behind the desk smiled. "Mrs. Alden tells me you're new to the neighborhood. Here's your library card. Welcome." The card was a simple piece of laminated plastic, but it felt like a small key to another life. I slid it into my wallet, oddly pleased. "This place is always looking for part-time help," Ruth added. "Front desk, shelving, a bit of everything. It's peaceful and you'd be good at it." I laughed. "Are you trying to recruit me?" "Not trying, succeeding." By the time we left, I'd filled out an application for a 12-hour-a-week position. The thought of being useful without being used brought a quiet thrill I hadn't expected. I imagined myself in the soft hush of the stacks, surrounded by words that asked nothing of me except attention. 2 weeks later, I was behind the desk, learning the barcode scanner and the rhythm of reshelving returns. My shifts ended with a comfortable tiredness, the kind that came from doing something I chose. One Thursday afternoon, as I was straightening a display of new arrivals, a familiar voice said, "Hey, Grandma." I turned, startled. Noah stood in the doorway, hands stuffed in his hoodie pocket, wearing an expression of forced nonchalance. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He shrugged. "Heard you were working here. Thought maybe I could get a job, too. Be nice to, spend more time together." Something about the way he said it didn't sit right. His eyes flicked around the library, lingering not on the books or the desk, but on the staff room door behind me. I decided to test him. It's not glamorous work, lots of lifting, alphabetizing, helping patrons, and the pay's nothing to brag about. "That's fine," he said quickly. "I just want steady income." "Uh-huh." Later that afternoon, I stepped into the staff room to grab my lunch and found him standing by the coat rack, my satchel in his hands. My satchel, where I kept my worn, leather-bound notebook. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharp enough to make him jump. He set it down, face flushing. "Just wanted to help you carry it." "That's thoughtful," I said evenly, "but you don't need to handle my things." His smile was sheepish, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else. Frustration, maybe even calculation. I could have sent him out right then, but instead, I walked over and opened the satchel myself. The notebook was still there, tucked between a library schedule and my lunch container. I placed it on the table, flipped it open to a blank page, and sat down. "Noah," I said, "if you really want to spend more time with me, let's use it wisely." He frowned. "What do you mean?" You think you need quick cash. What you need is to know what to do when you have money so you're not always desperate for more. His posture shifted, skeptical but curious. I tore a sheet of paper from the notebook and wrote 3 columns: income, expenses, goals. Every dollar you get should pass through these columns, I explained. Not because I'm nosy, because otherwise money will always slip through your fingers. He tried to hide a smirk. This sounds like homework. It is, I said. The kind that might keep you from sinking later. Whoa. We spent the next half hour sketching out what his next month might look like if he found part-time work. How much rent he'd need to contribute. How much for food. How much to set aside for emergencies. By the time he left, he still didn't have a library job, but he had something more valuable. The beginning of a plan. I watched him go, the front door's bell jingling as he stepped into the cool evening. For the first time in a long while, I felt that small spark of satisfaction that came from helping without enabling, offering tools, not cash. The cinnamon plant waited for me on the kitchen counter when I got home, its leaves catching the last light of day. I watered it, thinking about roots and how they only grow strong when the plant has to reach for what it needs. The move to the lakeside cottage took only a day. Years of traveling light had made it easy. Boxes of books, my cinnamon plant now thriving in a larger pot, and the handful of keepsakes that still mattered. The cottage was small but bright, with a wide deck facing the water. From the kitchen window, I could see the sun turn the lake silver in the morning and copper at dusk. I planted the cinnamon tree in a corner of the garden where it would catch the afternoon light. Ruth had given me a set of terracotta planters, and soon basil, rosemary, and thyme joined the cinnamon. There was a peace in tending to them, in seeing something grow because I cared for it, not because it demanded constant rescue. 2 weeks after settling in, I launched Quince and Quiet, a simple idea I'd been mulling over since my first afternoons at the library. On Wednesday and Saturday mornings, I opened my front room to seniors in the neighborhood. I brewed cinnamon tea, set out scones or tea cakes, and kept the shelves stocked with books they could borrow. The name came from my favorite fruit and the kind of peace I wanted the space to hold. The first Saturday, 6 people came. By the 3rd week, there were 14. Retired teachers, widowers, a couple of women from my church. Conversations were gentle, punctuated by the clink of teacups and the occasional laugh. No one asked for anything but more hot water or another chapter of whatever story we were reading aloud. It was during one of these mornings, while Ruth was slicing lemon loaf in the kitchen, that I saw the silver sedan pull into the gravel drive. My pulse quickened before I even saw her step out, Lauren. She looked thinner, her hair pulled back in a hurried ponytail, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She stood at the edge of the deck, hesitating. I met her at the door, blocking the way with my shoulder. Lauren. "Mom," she said, and her voice cracked, not with stage theatrics this time, but with something closer to weariness. "I need your help." Ruth glanced over from the kitchen but said nothing, simply moving to the far counter as though giving us space. Lauren took a deep breath. $5,000, that's all I need. First month's rent and security deposit. I can't stay where I am now. Why not? My hours got cut at the cafe and the motel. She trailed off, staring at the deck boards. It's not safe. I kept my voice steady. I'm sorry you're in that situation, but I'm not giving you money. Her head snapped up, eyes flaring. You'd really see me homeless? I'd really see you find a way to stand on your own, I said. The silence between us stretched, taut and brittle. Behind me, the scent of cinnamon tea drifted in from the kitchen, grounding me. Lauren's mouth trembled. I don't know how. You learn, I said gently. Just like I had to learn after your father died. Saw her eyes darted past me, scanning the cozy room beyond, the tea set, the books, the chairs filled with quiet conversation. This is what you chose instead of helping your own daughter? I chose a life where I'm not drained dry, I replied. For a moment, she looked like she might push past me, but Ruth stepped quietly into the doorway, setting a plate of lemon loaf on the small table beside us. Lauren, Ruth said softly. Your mother has helped you more than most people ever get from family. Maybe it's time to take that strength and use it for yourself. Lauren's gaze shifted between us, frustration warring with something like shame. Finally, she turned without another word, walking back to her car. The gravel crunched under her tires as she drove away. I stood there for a long moment, the open door spilling sunlight into the room. Ruth rested a hand lightly on my arm. You kept your boundary, she said. That's not easy. I closed the door, not slammed, not locked, but closed. Half shut, half open. Inside, the cinnamon tea was still warm, and the quiet voices of my guests still filled the room. I poured myself a cup and rejoined them, the lake glinting just beyond the window. The next Saturday morning dawned bright and cold, the kind of winter sun that made the lake shimmer like glass. I was arranging a fresh plate of scones on the low table in the front room when I saw Ava's little hatchback pull into the drive. She stepped out carrying a box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, her eyes bright with a secret. Bah, she said, smiling as she brought it inside. I found something that belongs here. I untied the twine and folded back the paper to reveal a wooden case lined with faded velvet. Inside, nestled in its compartments, was my mother's porcelain tea set, the one with delicate gold vines curling up the sides, the same set we'd used on holidays when Lauren and I still spoke without edge. I thought Quince and Quiet could use something special, Ava said. It's been in Mom's attic for years. She wasn't using it. My hands lingered on the smooth porcelain. The teapot was lighter than I remembered, but the pattern glowed just the same in the morning light. This is perfect, I murmured. Ruth, who had arrived early to help, looked over my shoulder and let out a low whistle. That's an heirloom if I've ever seen one. We set it up together on the counter, and before the guests arrived, Ava brewed the first pot of cinnamon tea in it. When the steam curled up from the spout, the room seemed warmer, fuller. My guests noticed immediately, their voices lilting with admiration. It felt like a bridge between past and present, between what had been lost and what I was building now. Ava stayed for the whole session, pouring tea, laughing with the regulars, even reading aloud from a slim poetry book one of the guests had brought. Every so often she'd glance at me with that quiet look of hers, something between pride and understanding. It lifted me in a way few things had lately. When the last guest left and Ruth began gathering cups, I stepped out onto the deck to shake out the tablecloth. That's when I saw a car pull up. Silver, familiar. Lauren. She stepped out slowly, as if measuring the air between us. The week's wear showed on her. Creased clothes, hair that had lost its shine, eyes ringed in fatigue. She walked toward the deck, but didn't meet my gaze. I just came to get Ava, she said. She's inside, helping Ruth. Lauren moved past me without another word. I followed her into the front room where Ava was drying the last cup from the new tea set. Ready? Lauren asked her daughter. Almost, Ava said. Let me grab my bag. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Lauren standing in the center of the room. Her gaze swept over the shelves, the scones cooling on the counter, the vase of fresh rosemary. Then it landed on the wall by the window, on a framed photograph of her as a little girl, maybe 6 years old, hair in loose braids, grinning with a missing front tooth. She stepped closer, fingertips brushing the glass. Her shoulders shifted, and for an instant her breath caught. There was a softness in her expression I hadn't seen in years, the faintest shimmer in her eyes. Hope stirred in me, unbidden. Maybe this was the moment. The first crack in the wall we'd both built. Maybe she would say she remembered, that she missed the way things had been. But then she straightened, her jaw tightening. The glimmer in her eyes sharpened into something colder. She turned to me, voice low but edged. "You'll regret this," she said. The words landed heavy, like a stone in still water. Before I could respond, Ava reappeared, bag over her shoulder. She glanced between us, sensing the tension, but said nothing. Lauren walked out without another word, the gravel crunching under her shoes. From the doorway, I watched her get into the car. She didn't look back. Ava waved from the passenger seat before the door closed, her expression apologetic. The sound of the engine faded down the road, leaving the winter air unnervingly still. Inside, Ruth set the last cup on the drying rack. "She came here looking for a yes you weren't gonna give," she said quietly. I nodded, but my eyes lingered on the photograph. The little girl in the frame smiled out at me, frozen in a time when I'd thought love alone was enough. I turned the picture toward the wall, not to hide it forever, but to give myself space to breathe. Outside, the cinnamon plant swayed in the cold wind, steady despite the season. The second table community room smelled of cinnamon and nutmeg that morning. Ruth had insisted on baking 2 pies for the occasion, their golden crusts cooling on the counter while guests found their seats. I'd set out the porcelain tea set Ava had given me, each cup gleaming under the warm light. It wasn't a grand event, just our small group gathered to mark another year of friendship and quiet victories. Some had brought flowers, others brought stories. The table in the center held both. When the chatter settled, Noah stood up from his seat near the window. He'd changed in the months since the hallway siege, hair cut neat, clothes pressed, posture straighter. "I wanted to share some news," he began, glancing around the room. "I've been working full-time at Patterson's garage for 3 months now, and..." He grinned, almost shyly. "I signed the lease on my first apartment yesterday." The applause was warm, genuine. Ruth beamed. I felt my chest swell, not with pride in myself, but in him, for the work he'd chosen to do. "I wouldn't have gotten here without some tough love," he said, and though he didn't look directly at me, I knew the words were meant for my ears. I didn't get it then, but I do now. Before I could speak, Ava stood. She unfolded a piece of paper from her pocket, her voice steady as she read. "This is for my grandmother," she began. "You've shown me that love isn't about saying yes to everything. It's about saying yes to the right things and no when it matters most. You've given me an example of how to live with integrity, even when it's hard. I hope I can do the same for someone one day." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that pressed gently into my ribs. Around us, the room was still, the air thick with something unspoken yet shared. I reached for her hand. "You already are," I said quietly. The rest of the gathering passed in an easy rhythm. Stories exchanged, pie slices disappearing, the low hum of contentment weaving through every conversation. As people left, I hugged each one, grateful for the kind of family you meet by choice, rather than by chance. Thanksgiving at the cottage came just a week later. The air outside was crisp, the lake a mirror for the pale November sky. Inside, the kitchen was alive with warmth, steam rising from the turkey, the scent of sage and cinnamon mingling with fresh bread. It was just the 4 of us this year, Ava, Noah, Ruth, and me. Ava had brought pumpkin pie again, Noah a basket of rolls still warm from the oven. Ruth moved with quiet efficiency between stove and counter, checking the stuffing while I poured tea into the gold-vined cups. We set the table with care. Ava lit the candles, their soft glow casting a golden sheen over the china. Noah carved the turkey, his hand steady, a far cry from the restless boy who'd once asked me for just a little to get by. Dinner was easy. We talked about Noah's new apartment, Ava's classes, Ruth's plans for the winter reading series at the library. There was laughter, the clink of silverware against plates, and the occasional comfortable silence. Midway through dessert, my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't need to check the screen to know. The ringtone was familiar, one I'd once answered without hesitation. Lauren. I looked at the phone for a long moment, its light blinking steadily in the dim kitchen. Then I reached over, pressed the side button, and let the sound fade into nothing. Ruth poured me more tea without a word. Noah passed the whipped cream to Ava, who was already laughing at something he'd said. I cradled the warm cup in my hands, letting the cinnamon-scented steam curl into the air between us. Outside, the lake reflected the glow from the cottage windows, still and sure. Inside, the table held people who saw me as more than an open wallet. I took a slow sip, feeling the weight of the silence. Not heavy, but full. It was acknowledgement without a single word spoken. The Monday after the second table gathering, I stopped by the library before opening Quince and Quiet. A stack of returned books waited at the counter, and behind it, a familiar envelope rested with my name, written in careful script. The librarian, a soft-spoken man named Henry, handed it over. "This came in for you this morning. We thought you might want to open it here." I slid it open with the edge of my thumbnail. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead from the library. Dear Mrs. Hale, on behalf of the Downtown Youth Outreach Program, we want to thank you for your anonymous contribution last month. The funds allowed us to set up a study corner for a group of homeless teens who've been using the library as a safe space. They now have warm lighting, charging ports, and a small shelf of donated books, many of which came from your Quince and Quiet visitors. Your quiet generosity has made a visible difference. The kids asked us to tell you they feel seen. With gratitude, the Outreach Committee. I felt something shift in my chest as I read the words again. Seen. That was what Ava had written on her little cinnamon drawing months ago. What she'd meant was what these kids felt now. Henry noticed my pause. "You do a lot more than people realize," he said. "We just happened to notice." Walking home, the letter tucked safely in my coat pocket, the cold air felt sharper, but cleaner. In my mind, I could picture those kids sitting at their corner table, warm light on their faces, books under their arms. I hope they understood that sometimes the person who helps you most isn't the one shouting about it, but the one quietly making sure you have what you need to stand on your own. By the time I reached the cottage, the lake had picked up the afternoon wind. Cinnamon leaves rattled softly in their pot, a rhythm I'd come to associate with small, steady victories. Thanksgiving passed, and the next morning arrived with that peculiar hush of a holiday's aftermath. The quiet after a storm of cooking, conversation, and candlelight. I was still in my robe, the kettle beginning to whistle, when I noticed something on the front porch. A plain white envelope leaned against the doorframe. No stamp, no return address. I opened the door, the chill nipping at my ankles. The porch was empty, but the envelope waited like a held breath. Inside was a single piece of lined paper. No salutation, no signature, just 4 words written in Lauren's unmistakable hand. "I have seen you." I stood there for a long moment, the wind lifting the edge of the page. My first instinct was to wonder what she meant. Was it an olive branch, or just another angle to pull me back into her orbit? But the words, stark and simple, didn't carry the tone of manipulation I'd braced for. They felt quieter. Still, I didn't reach for the phone. Instead, I walked to the small cedar cabinet in the living room, where I kept my cinnamon notebook, the one Ava had started for me with her little sketch and "I see you." I slipped Lauren's note between those pages, letting it rest among the other fragments of recognition I'd collected this year. The kettle's whistle rose behind me, insistent but not urgent. I turned it off and poured the hot water over loose tea leaves, the steam rising like a soft curtain between me and the rest of the world. Through the kitchen window, the lake caught the early sun, scattering light across its rippling surface. I thought about how seeing someone doesn't erase the past. It doesn't magically mend the cracks, but it can be the first step toward something that isn't as broken. I didn't know if Lauren and I would ever sit across from each other again, sharing tea from the gold-vined pot Ava had rescued. I didn't know if this note meant she was ready to stand on her own, or if she was simply acknowledging at last the truth of who I'd always been. But I knew this. I didn't need to call her back to feel the victory in that moment. Some wins are loud. Others live in the quiet, in the space you make for yourself and guard fiercely. I took my tea to the deck, the cinnamon plant brushing against my sleeve as I sat. The note stayed inside, tucked safe in its place. Not as a promise, not as a plea, but as a marker. Out on the water, a lone heron glided low, its shadow passing over the lake in a smooth, unbroken line. I watched it disappear into the far distance, the ripples it left behind already fading. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of cinnamon from the plant at my elbow. I breathed it in, letting the warmth settle into my bones. Whatever came next, calls, letters, or silence, I had already won the one thing I needed most: peace.